The first week in April 1986 was marked by two terrorist bombings. The first on a TWA flight from Los Angeles to Cairo. The bomb detonated over Greece, as the aircraft was on approach to a stopover in Athens. 1 pound of plastic explosive blew a hole in the side of the aircraft, killing 4 passengers, including an 8-month-old infant. Fortunately, the pilot was able to maintain control of the aircraft to make an emergency landing, and the remaining 110 passengers survived, with 7 needing treatment for minor shrapnel wounds. A group calling itself the Arab Revolutionary Cells claimed responsibility, citing renewed friction between American and Libyan naval forces in the Gulf of Sidra in recent weeks. 3 days later, a bomb exploded at La Belle nightclub in West Berlin. The disco was known to be a favourite of American soldiers posted in the divided city, and Sergeant Kenneth Ford was killed instantly, alongside Turkish woman Nermin Hanay. 230 were injured in total, and another US Army Sergeant, James Goines, was critically injured and later died. No group claimed responsibility for the attack, but the Reagan administration immediately pointed the finger at the Libyan state, an accusation that would later be backed up by a trial 10 years later when the unified German investigators had access to former Stasi files on agents working for Libya. Things weren't looking good for American law enforcement at home either. 2 days before the Spanish Grand Prix, a shootout between FBI agents and 2 suspects developed into one of the most violent and sensationalized episodes in the Bureau's history. After a bank robbery in Miami, the 2 suspects were cornered in a parking lot by 8 FBI agents. Despite being comprehensively outnumbered, the 2 suspects were able to kill 2 of the FBI agents and wound 5 more, leaving only 1 uninjured, and were apparently able to keep firing after being hit multiple times, a fact which prompted the FBI to look into changing to a handgun with a bit more oomph. The engagement has been studied by law enforcement schools repeatedly since. And on the race day itself, Pope John Paul II visited the Great Synagogue of Rome, the first time a pope had visited a synagogue since St. Peter as far as anyone knew, and certainly the first official visit by a reigning pope. John Paul II was keen to build bridges. One of the Pope's official titles is Pontifex, meaning bridge builder, between Catholics and members of other religions, particularly those where there had historically been strife, such as with the Protestant, Jewish and Orthodox traditions. He apologised for and criticised previous church treatment of the Jews, including both their previous official discrimination and the church's seeming lack of action during the Holocaust. And for the first time since 1981, the F1 circus was off to sunny Spain. The 1981 race had been the last at the dusty, narrow Jarama circuit near Madrid, which had not only been deemed unsuitable for modern F1 cars, but also fallen victim to politicking between the 2 Spanish automobile associations tasked with organising it. Not only that, but Formula 1 had never really taken off in Spain. No Spaniard had ever completed a full season in F1, never mind winning a race, and motorbike racing was far more popular. The city of Jerez de la Frontera in the southwest of Spain was the host of the Rally del Sherry, named after the fortified wine the area was known for, from 1969 to 1975, so there was a tradition of motorsport in the area, and in 1985 the mayor of Jerez, Pedro Pacheco, announced the building of a new purpose-built circuit just outside the city. It was designed by Italian Sandro Rocci, and would, it was hoped, attract the Formula 1 circus to return to Spain and kindle interest in the sport. The circuit opened in December 1985 and hosted a round of the Spanish Touring Car Championship before being approved and added to the F1 calendar. The race would be sponsored heavily by Tío Pepe, the local major sherry brand, whose grid girls looked very dapper in their bolero jackets and wide-brimmed hats. Between the apparently high ticket prices, isolated location of the circuit, and relative lack of publicity, and Spain's traditional apathy towards Formula 1, the crowds weren't exactly fighting to get in the gates, and they missed a cracking battle in qualifying, as once again the Williamses and Senna duked it out for pole under the banners for Tío Pepe Sherry. And just as in Brazil 3 weeks earlier, it was Ayrton Senna who took the spot, with Piquet alongside and Mansell in third. Next were the McLarens, hoping for a revival in their fortunes after a pretty indifferent race in Brazil, with Arnoux and Lafitte continuing Ligier's revival in 6th and 8th, alternating places with the Benettons in 7th and 9th, with Dumfries 10th. The Ferraris were all at sea once again, with Johansson 11th and Alboreto, struggling with a nasty cold, 13th behind Brundle, who tried out the new Tirolo 15 but bent it. The Brabham cars were back on row 7, the Arrowses 19th and 22nd and desperate for their own new car, and as usual the Minardis brought up the rear, with Nannini still struggling to find his feet, 1.4 seconds off his teammate and nearly 9 off Senna. Much of the pre-race chat was about the three-way rivalry developing between Senna, Piquet and Mansell. Not only did the three look dominant on track at the moment, but, allegedly, Mansell was fuming at Senna nerfing him off the opening lap of the last two races, Piquet didn't rate Senna at all, Senna was irked by Piquet's attitude, and both Williams drivers thought they should be the number one and disliked the other one. The Andalusian sun blazed down as the cars lined up on the grid, and at the start Senna seemed to creep forward a little, but not enough to be penalised, as all 25 cars roared off to christen the new circuit. Senna leaped into the lead, with the cars behind sorting themselves out into a team-by-team formation, with the Williamses, McLarens and Ligiers in pursuit, Lafitte getting ahead of Fabi at the expense of the Benetton's front left wing. Fabi dropped back, allowing Dumfries up into 8th, having made a cracking start. Nannini's woes continued as his differential didn't last the first lap, and off-camera there was a collision between Jones and Palmer that put both out in the first lap too. Rosberg took third on Mansell on lap 2, and stuck himself firmly to the back of Piquet as the top 7 started to pull away at the head of the pack, all running close together around the twisty new track. There was obviously something up with the Minardi's differential, as the Jerez climbed out with the same problem at the end of lap 2, while behind the leading gaggle the Ferraris were making a little progress, with Johansson now up to 8th and Alboreto 9th, with Dumfries also having lost out to Berger and was now back down to 11th. By lap 6 the top 7 were still running close together, but the cameras still managed to miss Prost nipping past Mansell for 4th, while the Ferraris were also approaching the back of the group, with 1st to 9th places all covered by 5 seconds or so, and visible together on the straights, while it was Fabi who had put in the early fastest laps as he recovered from his early stop. It was certainly shaping up to be a pretty tight race, if not season overall. Patrese parked up his skateboard Brabham with a bad gearbox on lap 9, a spat was developing within the team over whether the BMW engine or the Weissman gearbox was responsible for the team's lack of speed so far, and Tombe came in the other Haas Lola for the team to fiddle with the front end, though he was able to continue, albeit having lost a lot of time. Meanwhile, up at the front, the top 7 were still running close together, having split into 2 smaller battles, Senna, Piquet, Rosberg, Prost, and Mansell, Arnoux, Lafitte, separated by about a second, with the Ferraris in formation a couple of seconds behind the lot of them. At least until on lap 10, Johansson went off with a brake problem just as he had in Brazil, going head-on into the tyre barrier. The unfortunate Swede climbed out of his car and promptly keeled over, being stretchered off with a suspected leg injury by commendably prompt marshals and whisked straight to the on-site hospital. The racing was close up front, but fairly uneventful, as Danner's Alfa Romeo engine gave up the ghost on lap 14 and De Angelis came back in to have a sick Brabham looked at. He went back out and emerged just in front of his erstwhile teammate Senna at the start of lap 18 and nearly took him out because he wasn't looking in his mirrors. He moved over quickly for everyone else to get through, presumably a bit red-faced under his helmet, and in all the excitement Mansell had also nipped past Prost to retake 4th place. Nigel quickly left Alain behind and came up behind his old teammate Rosberg as Senna continued untroubled in the lead, a lead which sometimes expanded and sometimes contracted, but was never more than a couple of seconds over Piquet, with never more than 4 seconds covering the top 5. On lap 22, the leaders swarmed past Philippe Streff's smoking Tyrrell, and Alboreto came in with what turned out to be a terminal problem with a wheel bearing, and a couple of laps later it was Arnoux' turn to come in. After much scratching of heads and poking of parts, he was finally diagnosed with a broken half-shaft and got out. De Angelis' gearbox gave out on lap 29, meaning that by half-distance there were 12 of the 25 starters still running. The order was still Senna, Piquet, Rosberg, Mansell and Prost in the top 5, with Lafitte 6th, then Berger, Brundle, Dumfries and Boutsen making up the top 10. As the front-runners lapped Fabi, 12th, and Seurat, 11th, Mansell took the opportunity to nip ahead of Rosberg into 3rd, by which time Piquet had dropped off Senna again and seemed to be having some trouble finding gears. 3 laps after passing his old teammate, Mansell passed his new one too, to go up to 2nd and set about catching Senna. As the cameras watched Senna lap Tombe and approach Dumfries, Prost got ahead of Rosberg as the McLarens both bore down on a stuttering Piquet, who was increasingly fishing for gears. Up at the front, Mansell had quickly caught Senna to attach himself to the back of the Lotus. A lap or so later, he managed to box Senna in behind Brundle's Tyrrell and pass both at the end of the pit straight. Just as he did so, Nelson Piquet's engine expired in a cloud of smoke, moving the McLarens up and giving Prost a clear track to charge at the leaders. Mansell began quickly pulling away from Senna, leading to questions about whether the Lotus was also beginning to feel sick as Prost bore down on him. Lafitte dropped out from 5th with another Ligier half-shaft failure, promoting Berger and Brundle behind him, but the Brit didn't get long to enjoy it before dropping out with an engine failure of his own. His place was taken by Dumfries, whose 6th became 5th when Berger stopped for tyres. By lap 52, Mansell led Senna by just over 4 seconds, with 20 laps to go, but Mansell's tyres were beginning to fade and Senna was catching the Brit once more, with Prost hot on his heels. Before long, the top 3 were right together. Johnny Dumfries once again dropped out of a points position when his gearbox cracked up on the pit straight, leaving 8 cars still running. The leaders were actually coming up to lap a 4th-placed Rosberg, who dropped right back, allowing Dumfries to unlap himself just before retiring. Mansell passed Keke without too much ado, but the Finn chopped across in front of Senna to take his line for the next corner, which allowed Prost to get right on Senna's gearbox. But he was unable to make the most of it, as they both went past Rosberg. With Mansell still struggling on his tyres, the Williams team came out ready for a stop, though Nigel was of course reluctant to make one with such a narrow lead and so few laps left. But Senna was now really nipping at his heels, and it was all Mansell could do to keep him behind, while Prost waited just behind for the pair to take each other out, which looked like a real possibility. Rosberg made a tyre stop himself without losing 5th place, allowing the Goodyear technicians to have a look at the tyres and make their recommendations to Patrick Head & Co. Out on track, Senna finally managed to get his nose inside at the hairpin, forcing Mansell to either go wide or hit him, and Mansell went wide, losing second to Prost as well. With nothing now to lose, Nigel peeled straight into the pits for new tyres, heading out in a cloud of tyre smoke and dust, still third. So now, Senna led Prost by 2.46 seconds at the end of lap 64 out of 71, with Mansell nearly 20 seconds behind. After some close racing, it looked as if it was all over by the shouting. Mansell begged to differ though, tearing round on his new rubber. He'd got the gap down to 12.8 seconds after a couple of laps, and a lap later it was 8.7 seconds, and he was looming in Prost's mirrors already. Prost was also having tyre troubles, and the next time round Mansell was right behind and weaving to and fro looking for a way through at the start of lap 69. Somehow, despite it being the only battle happening on the track, the cameras missed Mansell going past Prost into second, so with 3 laps left, Mansell had 7 seconds to make up, and if he managed that, he had to get past Senna. Next time round it was 5.3 seconds. Next time, the last lap, it was 1.589 seconds. As Senna braked for the last corner, Mansell was on him. He went right to slingshot past, Senna went right to block him, and as commentators everywhere shouted themselves hoarse, the pair crossed the line right together. Ayrton Senna had the win by just 14 thousandths of a second, the third closest Grand Prix finish in history at the time. Senna's third career win denied Mansell his third, with Prost and Rosberg coming home 3rd and 4th, and Farby leading Berger home for a double points finish for Benetton. Boutsen and Tombe, both multiple laps behind after lengthy pit stops, made up the remaining finishers. It had been a cracking finish to an entertaining race. A grandstand finish, one might almost say, if the grandstands hadn't been so spectacularly empty. The last Spanish Grand Prix at Jarama had seen a nail-biting finish between Villeneuve and Lafitte, and the mayor of Jerez would be hoping that the excitement would mean more bums on seats next year. Certainly, all in the Grand Prix fraternity were delighted with the circuit and its facilities, and were looking forward to returning. And what of Mansell and Senna? After their previous encounters, many expected more verbal handbags after the race, but both seemed pretty equable afterwards. Senna acknowledged that his tyres were going off and he couldn't have kept Mansell back any longer, while Mansell said Senna's move at the end was perfectly fair, defending his line. It was so close, said Mansell, that really they should average out the points for first and second and give them 7.5 each. He finished off with a message to his boss, still convalescing at home.
I'm sorry, Frank, but I feel sure there was that much in it and number 5 was in front. but next time.